He was just the janitor. Invisible, unseen, until the CEO froze in front of France's biggest investors, lost, unprepared, humiliated. And then from the back of the room, a quiet voice spoke flawless French. What happened next didn't just save the company. It exposed everything they'd tried to bury, and revealed a man the world had always ignored. Until now, the black car rolled to a smooth stop outside the Hotel de Lune, a restored 18th century palace turned into one of Paris's most exclusive conference centers. Polished limestone glinted under the morning sun. Security details stepped out first. Then Gregory Langston emerged, grey-tailored suit, dark shades, leather briefcase in hand. He looked every inch the billionaire CEO the press had called America's new oracle of innovation. Inside, the lobby buzzed with quiet opulence. Murano chandeliers, velvet-lined benches, the soft hiss of espresso from a silver cart. But Gregory didn't notice any of it. His eyes locked on the golden elevator doors and the final negotiation that waited 6 floors above. This wasn't just any deal. This was the one. A $1.1 billion merger between Caliber Tech and NeuroQuant, France's most advanced AI think tank. Years in the making, 6 months of pre-negotiation, 3 NDAs, a dozen private dinners, and 1 handshake away from changing the company's global trajectory. Gregory had rehearsed every line, every cue, every pause. He didn't speak French, but he didn't need to. At least that's what he told himself. His translator, Simone, had handled everything so far. She was brilliant, sharp, native-born Parisian, the safety net that made it all feel effortless. In the elevator, his VP of strategy, Lindsay Cho, adjusted her tablet and murmured the latest figures. Gregory only half listened. He kept glancing at his reflection in the mirrored wall, straightening his lapel. They respect strength, he said. So today we show them who leads. The doors opened directly into the private conference suite. White orchids, double espresso on each saucer. The NeuroQuant team was already seated. 5 men in dark suits, 1 woman in a navy silk blouse, all with the kind of cold elegance that came from generations of institutional power. Gregory smiled broadly, extended his hand. "Gentlemen, madame," he said. There was a pause, polite smiles. But they waited. Where was Simone? Lindsay whispered urgently behind him. "She's not here yet. Must be delayed." Gregory's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of discomfort rippled through him. He tried to continue, switching to prepared remarks in English, carefully printed in bold font. "I want to begin by expressing our great enthusiasm for this historic union." The French side nodded, but their expressions barely changed. No warmth, no spark, just the clicking of pens, and the occasional quiet translation whispered between them. One of the men leaned to another and murmured something. They stifled a chuckle. Gregory felt heat rise behind his collar. His rhythm broke. His hands, usually firm and sweeping, now fidgeted at his sides. He glanced at the door again. Still no Simone. The deal, his crown jewel, was slipping, and he could feel it. Gregory's phone buzzed. He glanced down, expecting a final prep text from Simone. Instead it was from the hospital. The subject line was all he needed to see. Urgent medical event. Simone Moreau. His thumb hovered above the screen as a cold chill ran up his spine. Lindsay leaned in. "Gregory, what is it?" He opened the message. The words blurred for a moment before settling. "In-flight stroke. Unresponsive. ICU at Hospital St. Louis. Condition critical." He didn't speak, just handed the phone to Lindsay. She went pale. Silence fell over the pre-meeting prep room. One wall lined with charts and nameplates, the other with a view of the Seine. Beyond the glass partition, the French delegation sat patiently at the long table, murmuring in low tones, sipping espresso, waiting for him, waiting for Simone. Gregory's breath caught. "Okay," he said sharply. "Find someone, anyone. There has to be a translator in the building. I've called the consulate, the embassy, 3 agencies already," Lindsay said, typing furiously on her tablet. "Best ETA is 90 minutes, and none of them specialize in business negotiation, not at this level." Gregory pressed his fingers to his temples. "We don't have 90 minutes. The team looked to him for a plan, but there was nothing in the playbook for this. "Does anyone here speak any French?" he snapped. No one moved. Not even a shrug. A junior analyst cleared his throat. "I took 2 semesters in college, but I I can't really, no. Gregory turned to the glass again. The French team remained composed, but he knew what that calm meant. They were noting the delay, reading the weakness. France was fluent in performance, and Gregory was moments from walking into that room without his armor. The CFO stepped forward. Should we reschedule? Gregory shook his head, jaw tightening. Postponing looks worse than limping through. Lindsay lowered her voice. Gregory, we're about to negotiate $1 billion merger, in a language none of us speak. He looked down at his hands. They were steady, but only just. The polished steel Rolex caught the light. Across the glass, one of the French executives glanced at his watch. They were out of time. Gregory straightened his tie. Then we fake it, he said, not believing a word. Stick to numbers, visuals, smile at the right times. Lindsay hesitated, and when they asked questions, Gregory didn't answer, because he didn't know, because Simone, their only bridge, was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, and the €1 billion deal, it was about to drown in silence. The lights dimmed slightly as Gregory stepped to the front of the glass-walled conference room, clutching the remote like a lifeline. Behind him the first slide illuminated, strategic alignment, caliber tech plus neuroquant. He smiled broadly. Good morning, he began, his voice unnaturally loud. We are very honored to be here today, to discuss the synergetic opportunity of this union. A pause. No reaction. Not even polite nods. He cleared his throat. At Calibre Tech, we believe in innovation that crosses borders, that transcends, how you say, boundaries. He glanced back at the screen, trying to find comfort in bullet points. But the next line tripped him up. AI convergence through hybrid system modularity. He stumbled, tried again. Modularité. He said it like modularite, flattening the syllables like drywall. From the French side, Madame Fournier blinked slowly. Her pen stopped moving. Gregory pushed forward, faster now. Jargon was his armor. If he stuck to numbers he could regain control. In Q3, we observed exponential uptick in cognitive node clusters, with predictable margins of optimization. The silence was brutal. Across the table one of the French directors tilted his head toward another and whispered something. The second man smirked. Gregory felt it like a splinter, the wrong kind of whisper. The kind you pretend not to notice when you're bleeding. He gestured toward the chart behind him. Here we see, the courbe de croissance, the growth curve, he added, proud to recall one phrase Simone used last week. But his pronunciation cracked. Courbe came out like corpse. This time someone did laugh. A quiet chuckle, short, sharp, followed by an apologetic cough, as if to cover it. Gregory forced a grin. Forgive my French, he said, attempting levity. It fell flat. Even Lindsay winced. Then came the questions. One of the senior French negotiators leaned forward. Pardon, Monsieur Langston, he said slowly, in clear but clipped English. Your slide mentions déploiement systémique sur l'infrastructure cognitive. Could you elaborate? Gregory froze. That was Simone's phrasing. He had no idea what it meant beyond the broad strokes. He gave a vague nod. Yes, of course. We deploy systematically across cognition platforms. Which, the man raised a brow. Gregory trailed off. From the corner of his eye, he saw Madame Fournier lean back, arms crossed now. Two others scribbled notes without looking at him. He felt it, like an elevator dropping floors too fast. That quiet shift when power starts to leak from your hands and into someone else's. His mouth was dry, his tie suddenly too tight. The room didn't need to shout. It was already screaming. The third espresso sat untouched by Gregory's elbow, long gone cold. Across the table, Monsieur Bouchard, NeuroQuant's lead negotiator, leaned in with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. He spoke in measured English, but with just enough of a French rhythm to demand full attention. So, Bouchard began. Regarding the intellectual property clause, you are amenable to a 40/60th division, yes? Gregory nodded instinctively. Of course, that's acceptable. Lindsay's head snapped toward him. Bouchard blinked, then glanced sideways at Madame Fournier, who stifled a laugh with a swift sip of her espresso. Gregory felt it again, that sinking cold in his gut. Something was off. He turned toward Lindsay, searching for confirmation, but her face had gone rigid. "Wait," she said under her breath. "Did he just say they take 60? Gregory frowned. "He said we split it." "No, Gregory. He said they get 60, 40 for us. On our tech." It hit him like a punch. He had just agreed on record to surrender majority IP rights in one of the biggest AI patents Calibitech owned. A soft, unmistakable chuckle rippled down the French side of the table. Not loud, not cruel, but real. One of the junior delegates leaned back in his chair, covering his mouth, his eyes flashing with the kind of amusement people try to hide, but never fully do. Bouchard straightened his cuffs, schooling his face into formality. "Excellent. I will have our legal team add that clause immediately." Gregory opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Just the hiss of his breath, sharp and unsteady. He looked around the room. They were watching him, not as a leader, not even as a peer, but as a man who'd just revealed he didn't know the game he was playing. Silence stretched like wire. No one moved. Even the hum of the lights felt louder. Lindsay whispered, "You need to correct it." Gregory's throat worked. "Actually, I may have misunderstood." But it was too late. The tone had changed. The laughter had said enough. The French team no longer saw a powerhouse. They saw a man drowning behind his own slides. A man who couldn't survive without someone holding his linguistic hand. He glanced once more at the empty seat where Simone should have been, then dropped his eyes to the table, not to think, to hide. The moment had slipped, and with it, the illusion of control. The tension hung like fog in the room. Thick, unmoving, impossible to breathe through. Gregory stared down at his notes, suddenly meaningless. Lindsay tapped furiously on her tablet, searching for a way to fix what had already cracked. The French delegation had resumed speaking quietly among themselves, no longer bothering to hide their amusement. Pens tapped. Jackets rustled. Madame Fournier let out a quiet sigh that sounded like a verdict. And then, a voice. Clear, steady, unmistakably fluent. "Pardonnez-moi, messieurs. Mais je crois qu'il y a eu un malentendu concernant la clause de propriété intellectuelle." The words floated effortlessly across the room, smooth, warm, carried not just with fluency, but poise. Every head turned. At the back of the room, just beyond the glass double doors, stood a man in a grey janitorial uniform. Mid-40s, lean build, pressed collar. In one hand, he held a microfiber cloth. The other rested calmly on a polished chrome cart filled with glass cleaner and folded towels. He didn't move, didn't shrink. He just spoke again, this time addressing Monsieur Bouchard directly. "Vous avez dit 60% pour ne raconter. Je crois que Monsieur Langston avait compris l'inverse. Peut-être pourrions-nous clarifier." Silence fell. Not heavy, not hostile, just stunned. Bouchard blinked, then sat back slightly in his chair, tilting his head like he'd just discovered an antique he never knew was valuable. Gregory turned toward the voice, confused, disoriented. "Who?" The janitor nodded once. "André, sir. Maintenance staff. I overheard. Thought it might be helpful to clarify the distinction." His tone was formal, respectful, but there was no hesitation in it. No apology for speaking. Lindsay looked like she'd forgotten how to blink. Gregory blinked twice. "You speak French?" André gave a modest nod. "Fluently. Studied in Paris. Sorbonne." The French team exchanged glances. Madame Fournier leaned forward slightly, curiosity flickering behind her glasses. "Votre accent est impeccable," she said softly. André smiled. "Just a little. Merci, madame. Je suis né à Marseille, raised in Atlanta." Gregory stood frozen, not from fear, but from something stranger. Disbelief laced with a dawning recognition that control had just entered the room again. But it hadn't come from him. The French delegation looked back and forth between André and Gregory. No one said a word, but everyone was thinking the same thing. The man they had ignored had just become the most important person in the room. André stepped through the glass doors with quiet ease, leaving the cleaning cart behind. His movements were deliberate. No rush, no performance, just calm. The fluorescent lights caught the faintest trace of silver at his temples. His grey overalls were crisp, name patch clean, shoes polished. The kind of man no one notices until he speaks. Gregory stared at him like he was seeing a ghost. Your maintenance, he said. André stopped a few steps from the table, hands clasped loosely in front of him. Yes, sir. Night shift. I cover early mornings when needed. And you speak fluent French. André offered the smallest of smiles. And read and write it. Along with Spanish, some German, and conversational Arabic. But today, French seems most urgent. Gregory said nothing, just stood there, blinking, like the words couldn't quite reach him. Madame Fournier gestured to the empty chair near the projection screen. We would be pleased if Monsieur Bellamy continued to assist. His phrasing was far more accurate. André turned to Gregory, not presumptuous, but ready. Sir, if you'd prefer I step out, I understand. But I think I can help restore clarity. Gregory opened his mouth to say no, then shut it again. There was no translator coming. The French were slipping away, moment by moment. And André, this quiet man with a soft voice and steady presence, had just single-handedly reversed the energy in the room. Gregory exhaled. Fine. Yes, please. Lindsay slid a chair away from the table. André sat down without fanfare, pulling a notepad from the inner pocket of his overalls. His pen was capped neatly. No trembling hands. No flash of ego. Just readiness. He turned to Monsieur Bouchard. If we could return briefly to the IP clause. I believe there was a misunderstanding. The American team did not intend to concede majority control. Bouchard nodded slowly. And yet, it was said. André's voice stayed warm. Words were said. But context matters. If we were in Marseille, and I asked if you'd take my mother's dinner recipe, you wouldn't assume I was offering you the rights to publish it commercially. That drew a surprised chuckle from the French side. Gregory looked around the room. The energy had shifted. Again, but this time it wasn't his to command. It belonged to the man in grey overalls, the one who had just walked in from the edge of the room, and taken control of the center without ever raising his voice. André leaned slightly forward in his chair. Not too much, just enough to signal that he belonged. His pen hovered over the notepad, but he rarely looked down. His eyes tracked every speaker, every pause, every twitch of hesitation. When Madame Fournier spoke again, she used a phrase layered with diplomatic weight. André didn't rush. He translated it into English with care, choosing words that reflected not just meaning, but tone. She says she appreciates Calibretech's commitment to shared sovereignty and research direction, not just ownership. Gregory blinked. That's what she said. André nodded, roughly, but more gracious. Lindsay glanced at the French delegation. For the first time in 40 minutes they were smiling. Genuine smiles. Not forced, not diplomatic. André kept going, guiding each exchange like a conductor with no baton. When Monsieur Leroux made a dry joke about American optimism in projected market penetration, André let the French side laugh, then turned to the Americans with a wry grin. He says you must be from California, with numbers like that. The room chuckled. Even Gregory smiled, half in relief, half in disbelief. But it wasn't just language. André added context. In France, the term valorization doesn't mean profit. It means bringing dignity to an idea. So when they say your IP should be valorisé, they're asking how it will be honored, not just monetized. He moved like he'd done this before, like he had sat at these tables long before he'd held a mop. When the discussion drifted into regulatory alignment, André referenced a 2017 case involving biometric data and AI ethics, citing the French court's ruling from memory. That turned heads. Madame Fournier leaned in. Monsieur Bellamy, you are not merely a translator. André offered a respectful nod. Just someone who's listened for a long time. Time blurred. The meeting that had been crawling now flowed. Slides advanced. Questions found answers. Walls fell away. André was no longer translating. He was weaving, bridging silence with rhythm, bridging jargon with humanity, bridging two worlds that had nearly collapsed on each other over a misheard phrase. Gregory sat back in his chair, watching the impossible unfold. The room that had nearly swallowed him now hummed with possibility, and the man they never saw was the reason it still breathed. The mop handle had always felt foreign in his hands. Not because André thought it was beneath him, but because once, years ago, His hands had held something very different. Books, chalk, ink-stained lecture notes, long before the uniform, before the 4 a.m. shifts, before the quiet nods in fluorescent hallways. André Bellamy had sat beneath vaulted ceilings in the 5th arrondissement of Paris. A scholarship student at the Sorbonne, specializing in comparative linguistics, fluent in 3 languages, fascinated by how culture wove itself into grammar, gesture, breath. He used to wake up early to read in café, his back pressed to the steam-warmed glass of Rue Saint-Jacques. He debated professors, he annotated treaties, he quoted poets no one remembered. French was not a tool to him. It was an inheritance, a rhythm. He was 2 years in when the call came. Atlanta. His father, stroke, severe, recovery uncertain, medical costs rising. His younger sister, only 16, terrified. No one else to care for them. He packed his books into a single duffel, said goodbye to the Seine, and flew home. 1 semester from completing his degree, he stepped into a small apartment that smelled of liniment and silence. He found a job, any job. Nights at a printing press, then mornings cleaning public schools, then eventually, the contract with Calibratech. It was steady, honest. It paid the bills, bought insulin, kept the lights on. He kept speaking French in his head. On his break he'd listen to business podcasts in Mandarin, read trade deals out loud in Spanish. He'd stand in the break room reciting legal clauses under his breath just to keep the edges of fluency sharp. Not for anyone else. Just to stay ready. No one asked about the books he carried in his backpack. No one saw the notes tucked beside the window cleaner. He was invisible by design. But language stayed. It curled inside his memory like a lit coal, never quite going out. The world had forgotten him, but he had never forgotten the world. The doors had barely closed behind the French delegation when Gregory turned on his heel. "Walk with me," he said, his voice tight. André followed, silent. They moved down a narrow corridor lined with framed patents and portraits of Calibratech founders. Men in sharp suits, smiling like victory came easy. The kind of hallway where reputations were either built or burned. Gregory didn't stop until they reached a side lounge. Empty, soundproofed, overlooking the Seine. He shut the glass door behind them with a little too much force. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. André blinked. "Excuse me?" "That," Gregory said, gesturing vaguely back toward the conference room. "That performance. The little cultural lecture. The legal case references. Were you trying to embarrass me?" André didn't flinch. "I was trying to help. You didn't help. You hijacked the entire meeting." There was silence for a beat. Then André spoke. Quiet, but clear. "No, Mr. Langston. I salvaged it." Gregory's jaw tightened. André straightened his shoulders just slightly. "You were about to lose €1 billion deal. Not because you're not capable, but because you didn't understand the room you walked into. I don't need a janitor explaining diplomacy to me," Gregory snapped. André's eyes didn't move. "Then maybe you needed a linguist, or someone who understands that language is power, and that words don't just translate, they carry weight, history, respect." Gregory stared at him. André stepped forward, but not aggressively, just enough to level the air between them. "I didn't do this for you," he said. "I did it because the language deserved better. They deserve better. And frankly, so did your company." The words landed like soft hammers, quiet, but impossible to ignore. Gregory's face shifted. Anger still hovered, but something else crept in underneath. Something close to recognition. Or maybe shame. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking 10 years older. "You blindsided me." André nodded. "You weren't supposed to need me. That's the point of being invisible, isn't it?" Gregory looked away. The silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. Just honest. For the first time, he really looked at André. Not the uniform, not the title, but the man. The one who'd stepped out of the shadows not to take over, but to keep something from falling apart. And who, despite being ignored for years, had still chosen to speak up when it mattered most. The next morning, Gregory opened his laptop with a headache blooming behind his eyes. The meeting had made headlines in 2 languages. Calibratech NQ talks back on track after cultural misstep. But the praise didn't land. It just circled him like smoke. Then he saw the subject line. "Confidential. You're being played." No sender, No signature, just a single PDF attached. He hovered for a moment, then clicked. It opened to a spreadsheet. Timestamps. Internal emails. Slack messages. Trades. 2 names stood out immediately. James Faulkner and Rita Caldwell. Senior executives. Trusted. Smart. Dangerous. The emails were time-stamped from the past 6 weeks, all under company domains. We tanked this thing. Shares dip. We sell just before. Buy back cheap. Simple. Gregory's overconfident. Let him walk into it blind. We'll sweep the wreckage. The most recent one, dated just 3 days ago, read Simone's the linchpin. If she doesn't show, this thing collapses. Clock's ticking. Gregory sat very still. He read it twice. Then a third time. The realization didn't just sting, it cracked. Wide and hollow. They hadn't just hoped for failure. They had counted on it. Engineered it. And the plan would have worked. If Andre hadn't spoken up, he leaned back in his chair, suddenly aware of the silence in his office. The city moved outside the windows. Buses, suits, ambition. But in here, everything had stopped. Faulkner had been with him from the beginning. Rita had run 3 divisions. He'd trusted them both, given them stock options, autonomy, a seat at every table, and they had bet on his humiliation. Worse, they had nearly dragged the entire company down with them, except for a janitor. Gregory let out a breath. He didn't know he was holding. No, not a janitor. The man who had just saved Calibre Tech from internal implosion, who had stepped in not for credit, not for applause, but because he couldn't watch something be broken by arrogance and greed. He stared back at the email chain. And in that moment, Gregory Langston understood something that made his skin crawl. Andre hadn't embarrassed him. He'd exposed how many others already had. The restaurant sat just off Rue Saint-Honoré. White tablecloths. Low lighting. The kind of place where every pour of wine sounded like ceremony. Gregory had reserved the private dining room. Not for show, for privacy. The French delegation was already seated when he arrived with Andre in tow, both in pressed jackets, though only one wore his own name with certainty. Andre moved quietly, nodding to each guest with the kind of grace that made the maître d' blink twice. No one mentioned the janitor's uniform this time. It was gone. Over duck confit and conversation, laughter returned. Light, easy, fluent. The French side treated Andre not like a novelty, but like a colleague, a bridge, one of theirs. Halfway through dessert, Gregory cleared his throat, lifted his glass. To Monsieur Bellamy, he said, voice steadier than it had been in days, for reminding us that translation is more than words. It's understanding. The French raised their glasses. Madame Fournier smiled. To the man who reminded us we were speaking the same language all along. Andre nodded humbly, but said nothing. After the lunch, as the delegation left in sleek black cars, Gregory gestured for Andre to stay back. They stood under the canopy outside, the air cool and clean, rain threatening. I owe you more than I can say, Gregory said. But I won't waste your time pretending I saw you clearly before this week. Andre raised an eyebrow, just slightly. I wasn't trying to be seen, maybe not, but you were ready, and that matters. Gregory reached into his coat and pulled out a simple black folder, opened it. Inside a single-page offer, Director of Cultural Strategy, full salary, benefits, team of 5, reports directly to the CEO. It's yours, Gregory said. Not because I feel guilty, because I need someone who understands the rooms I keep failing to read. Andre took the folder, didn't open it. I'm not an executive, he said. Gregory didn't flinch. You're exactly what we need. And you already proved you understand more about diplomacy, nuance, and integrity than half the boardroom. Andre looked out at the street. A young couple walked by, arguing softly in French. He understood every word, every beat. He thought of mops, of classrooms, of empty bank accounts, and waiting rooms, and years of being invisible on purpose. He didn't say yes. He just held the folder, quietly. Sometimes the loudest answer is the one you don't speak at all. The apartment was small but warm, walls painted in soft clay tones, a candle flickering near the window, the hum of evening news low in the background. Andre let himself in with his usual knock. His sister Rochelle looked up from the couch, wrapped in a worn quilt that smelled like eucalyptus and old hope. She smiled. Took you long enough. I brought the good soup, he said. lifting the paper bag like a trophy. She laughed, weak but steady. "If it's the one with lemongrass, I'll forgive you." He poured it gently into a bowl, placed it in her hands, and sat beside her, the silence between them comfortable. She took one spoonful, then looked at him. "You're quiet." "I spoke a lot today," he said, running a hand over his jaw. "In French. To a room full of executives." She blinked. "Like, on purpose?" He smiled. "Yeah, on purpose." He told her everything. The failed translator, the boardroom collapse, the moment he stood up from behind the glass doors and changed the course of a €1 billion deal. He told her about the lunch, the job offer, the title. When he finished, Rochelle leaned back slowly, absorbing the weight of it. "You know," she said, her voice softer now, "when I was in chemo, I used to watch you come home from those double shifts and still read French case law on your phone. I didn't want to forget." André said. "You didn't," she said. "You just waited." They sat in silence for a moment. The candle flickered once. Outside, someone laughed on the sidewalk. Then she turned to him, eyes clear. "Maybe it's time they see who you really are." He looked at her, this woman who had beaten back death with a quiet kind of fury, who never once asked for pity. "I don't know if I belong in that world," he admitted. "You don't," she said. "You belong above it. Because you know what it looks like from below." He didn't respond, just sat with it. Let the words settle. In the corner of the room, her graduation photo still hung, her in a cap and gown, him standing behind her, hand on her shoulder, dressed in borrowed slacks. That night, before he left, she squeezed his hand and said, "You've always been the smartest man in the room, Dre." They just finally looked up. He walked home slowly, and when he reached his door, he opened the black folder and read every word. The elevator rose in silence, its mirrored walls catching the early light from the Seine. André stood still, his reflection unfamiliar but fitting. Charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, narrow black tie. Not borrowed, not patched together, tailored. It felt strange on his shoulders, but not wrong, like a language he hadn't spoken aloud in years, but had never truly forgotten. The doors opened on the 6th floor, the same corridor, only this time no one avoided eye contact. Lindsay stood waiting at the door to the conference room. Her eyes moved from his shoes to his collar. "Good morning, Director Bellamy." He offered a quiet nod. "Morning." Inside, the air buzzed with low conversation and the faint clink of glass. The NeuroQuant delegation was already seated, papers stacked neatly, expressions unreadable. Gregory stood at the head of the table. When he saw André enter, he paused, then gestured toward the seat to his right. But no one moved yet, because the French delegation had all risen to their feet. Monsieur Bouchard stepped forward, hand extended. "Monsieur Bellamy," he said warmly, "it is good to see you again properly introduced." André accepted the handshake. "Merci, monsieur. The feeling is mutual." Madame Fournier followed, her earrings catching the light as she smiled. "I trust this time we'll hear your voice from the start of the meeting." There was laughter, the real kind. André took his seat. No mop, no cart, just the weight of the room shifting with every word he hadn't yet spoken. Gregory cleared his throat. "Before we begin, let me formally reintroduce the man who saved this deal. André Bellamy, Director of Cultural Strategy. He'll be co-chairing today's session and managing all future international communications." There were no forced smiles, only nods of agreement. As the meeting began, André flipped open his leather folio, pen poised. The French partners leaned in when he spoke, listened when he translated, engaged when he explained, not just because of his fluency, because of his presence. The man who once stood outside the glass, forgotten, had returned, not as a footnote, but as the first name on the page. The glass walls of Calibre Tech's Manhattan headquarters reflected the late afternoon sky, blue streaked with orange, the city pulsing below. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted, quieter, sharper, lighter. The offices once filled with bravado now hummed with something else. Respect. Faulkner and Caldwell were gone, both ousted after the investigation confirmed everything the anonymous email had exposed. Their offices cleared, their names wiped from the leadership page without ceremony. In their place, new hires arrived, young, smart, hungry, many of them bilingual, 2 of them first-generation college grads, all of them hand-picked by André. He didn't take the corner office. Instead, he kept a modest one on the floor where the translation interns trained. The door was always open. Sometimes they found him sitting on the floor, helping a nervous 22-year-old prep for a cross-border presentation. Sometimes, he said nothing, just listened, because he knew the power of being heard. In the break room they still talked about that Paris deal, about how it nearly collapsed, about how it didn't, and how no one saw the man who saved it until he stood up. When Forbes arrived to do their feature, the janitor who rewired a company, Gregory Langston sat in the sleek boardroom, tie loose, posture different than it had been a year ago. He answered questions carefully. When the interviewer asked about regrets, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The best decision I ever made was listening to the quietest man in the room." Later that week, Gregory passed Andre in the hall. They didn't exchange more than a nod. They didn't need to. Power didn't shout anymore. It walked soft. That Friday, Andre returned home and placed a new acceptance letter on his sister's kitchen table. Columbia Executive MBA program, full sponsorship. She read it in silence, then looked up and smiled like she'd known all along. Andre smiled back. Somewhere across the city, another boardroom filled with noise. But here, in this quiet kitchen, the future was unfolding, measured, fluent, steady, the kind they'd never see coming, until it spoke. If this story moved you, if you believe talent has no uniform, no rank, and no accent, then share it. Because somewhere, someone is still being overlooked, and still preparing to shine. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories, where quiet power, resilience, and dignity rewrite the rules. Your voice matters. And sometimes, the quietest ones change everything.